Today I'm looking at pages from Presses 2 from the Whittington Press, which is their latest offering, and according to the publication announcement will also be the last letterpress printed book that they publish. It's a follow-on from Pages from Presses 1, which documented the origins of the private press movement. Pages from Presses 2 picks up the story with the maturation of the movement through the likes of Golden Cockerel, Greg Enog, Nonsuch, and so on. It was issued in 3 states. Here I'll be looking at one of the ordinary C states. And as usual, that book comes in a slipcase, which is bound in paper over these cloth-covered ends. A little bit unusually, the inside of the slipcase is lined not with white but with black paper, which I think is quite a nice touch. And I should also say that this slipcase feels very sturdy, very well made, so it's a nice solid slipcase, which is handy because the book happens to be not only physically quite large, so it's a relatively large folio, but also quite heavy. Turning to the production of the volume itself, we see that it's half bound again in the same green buckram cloth over Fabriano Roma paper, which is relatively plain, except that it has this watermark in the bottom right here with the capitoline wolf and the word Roma. Flipping the book over, we see on the spine we have the title blocked in gilt. Of course, the binding of the book is sewn. The top edge is trimmed, the bottom and 4 edges have been left untrimmed. Now let's open it up and have a look inside. So we have, first of all, this green laid paper end paper. Feels very nice with a slightly coarse texture. And then we get to the main paper of the edition, which is Czech Losin paper. And we last saw this paper, I believe, when I reviewed the Whittington Press's Ebble Valley. I very much liked the paper on that occasion. The same is true here. It has a wonderful coarse texture, almost like canvas, also a very nice tactile quality. And because this is a relatively large book, we get these huge spreads of the paper in front of us that are really quite enjoyable. And the paper is watermarked on occasion, both with the Losin name, but also with the Whittington Press mark. And I think I'm right in saying that this is the only book to have featured that press mark as a watermark. Then we arrive here at the title spread. On the right, we see a very standard title page from the Whittington Press with this austere centered layout. Here's the title and a list of the different presses that are considered in this edition. And then we see that they're accompanied by a commentary by David Butcher. And then here in the position we would usually expect to find a frontispiece, we have instead this fold-out poster which features press marks from the various presses featured in the edition. So we see examples of Golden Cockerel, Greg Enog, Nonsuch, Shakespeare Head, and so on. And one thing that's quite nice about this poster is at the bottom here we see it's printed on Joseph Batchelor's Crown and Sceptre paper. So one thing I know about that paper is that it was used also in another book. So this is Pastoral, which was also published by the Whittington Press. And this is a collection of engravings from Lucian Pizarro. And when Whittington published this book, they happened to acquire a stock of Crown and Sceptre paper from the Morgan Library in America. And I suspect that this poster is printed on the remnants of some of that stock. But that paper by now is over a century old, and it was produced by Joseph Batchelor to the specifications of William Morris at the Kelmscott Press. So it's a nice paper, but also a paper with a bit of historic pedigree and an interesting addition to this book. So moving beyond the title page, we first have a list of the leaves that are included in this edition. In the C edition, which I'm looking at here, there are 14 leaves, and the promise was that if you bought the A or B editions, you would get not only more leaves, but also slightly more interesting leaves that were more likely to feature illustrations and other forms of embellishment. But nevertheless, we have 14 leaves, which is a fairly generous offering, and plenty to get a good overview of the type of work that these presses were producing. So we have an introduction that provides a bit of background and historical context, and then we go straight into the presses. And the first thing we're going to see is that we deal with the Golden Cockerel press, and we get the first of our included original leaves. So this is a leaf from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, published by the Golden Cockerel press. It's one of Eric Gill's 3 major creations for that press. And so this is quite a special leaf, so it's nice to see them starting with this one. Here we do see a bit of an embellishment, a kind of illustration, but that's partly because so many of the pages in this edition were illustrated, and that's what makes the edition quite special and quite sought after. But more interestingly, perhaps from the point of view of pages from presses too, is to look at exactly how this leaf has been included in the book. And we can see that it's hinged here on this small tab of Locin paper, and so we can really handle it and turn it naturally in the way that we would turn any other page in the book. I think that's quite important, because part of the whole point of including these original leaves is that you can handle the paper, see what it feels like, get a real sense of the physical qualities of these books that are being discussed in the text. Then we come on to the beginning of David Butcher's essay about the Golden Cockerel press. Firstly, from a mechanical point of view, the book is set in Wellbalm in 14 didot size, so slightly bigger than 14 point. And you can see that it also has a fairly generous leading. And so I found this book actually, despite the large page size, to be very comfortable to read indeed. Of course, it was printed by letterpress at Whittington, and so it should go without saying that the quality of the printing is absolutely first rate. Now, the basic format here is that Butcher gives us a narrative account of the works of these presses from the press's inception through to its closure. Along the way, he stops to highlight some of the major books that the press has published, also some of the other events, such as change of ownership, that really shaped the destiny of the press. And one thing that's quite striking is that this book includes, if I remember correctly, 7 presses. That's really a lot of information to fit into a relatively short space, and yet David Butcher has managed to cram an awful lot of information about both the presses and the books in here, so we get a real sense of what were the major works published by each press, what were their distinguishing features, what were the characteristic styles of the books being published by these presses, what were some of the traumas experienced by the presses along the way. So I suspect that this book will become a very useful guide to me and other collectors as we build our collections of these presses and help to understand how those collections are situated within the wider history of the private press movement. So really a very valuable resource with a lot of information presented in a beautifully concise fashion. Here we have another Tipton leaf. And so the book continues with alternating collections of leafs and essays from David Butcher. So I will be quiet for a moment and just leaf through the book, and you can get a sense of the type of leaves that we have included and the general format of the book. Here we have a leaf with 2-color printing. Here we have some leaves from Homer's Odyssey, and this is an example where we have not only a single leaf, but 4 pages from a book. So it's not only single leaves in here. And there's the Kerwin press, a Nonsuch press. This one has an illustration, but again, this comes from a book which was known for being profusely illustrated, so it's not too surprising that we have an illustration on that particular occasion. Interesting variety of papers in terms of colour of the paper. Something you can't see here is that they are of different weights, different opacities, different surface textures. So if you're interested in private press printing and the varieties of paper that are used, it's a bit of a treat to have the opportunity to experience these different papers in one edition. And then we have a chronology of the major events in the lives of these 7 presses. And we have a bibliography with further reading. And of course, as always, the book ends with a colophon bearing details of its production. So that is Pages from Presses 2 from the Whittington Press. It's a shame to see the Whittington Press's work coming to an end, but this is a pretty fine way to end, and I expect this book will not only be of interest, but could be a quite valuable resource as you build your understanding and appreciation for the work that these presses have produced.